Did the Biden administration pressure social media companies to censor content? The U.S. Supreme Court will decide in a high-profile case about free speech. Donald Trump's legal team says it's impossible to post bond for his $454 million civil fraud judgment. The former president is asking the court for a delay while he appeals the ruling. New York City will no longer provide long-term shelter to illegal immigrants. We'll tell you who will be impacted by this new decision. The Environmental Protection Agency issues an order banning the last type of cancer-linked asbestos used in America. While EU leaders are contending with a trade agreement aimed at aiding Ukraine, they face pushback from the European Parliament due to concerns over its negative impact on farmers. NTD's David Vives speaks with a member of Parliament. The rise of early onset cancer has doctors and oncologists sounding the alarm. The founder of a cutting-edge cancer detection company discusses how new screening can catch the disease earlier. Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Stephanie Cox. President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke over the phone today to discuss the status of its war against Hamas in Gaza. The White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan just told reporters that Biden reiterated U.S. support for Israel on the call. The National Security Advisor added that Israeli forces have killed a number of Hamas's senior leadership, including an operation that killed the terror group's number 3 last week. Biden told Netanyahu that Israel needed a more coherent strategy to defeat Hamas going forward.
The President and the Prime Minister spoke at length about Rafah today. The President explained why he is so deeply concerned about the prospect of Israel conducting major military operations in Rafah of the kind it conducted in Gaza City and Khan Yunis. First, more than 1 million people have taken refuge in Rafah. They went from Gaza City to Khan Yunis and then to Rafah. And they have nowhere else to go. Gaza's other major cities have largely been destroyed. And Israel has not presented us or the world with a plan for how or where they would safely move those civilians, let alone.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Sunday he would keep on with the military campaign to eliminate terrorists in Gaza while ceasefire talks were set to resume.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Sunday pushed back fiercely against what he described as international pressure over the war in Gaza. At a cabinet meeting, he said, "To our friends in the international community, I say, is your memory so short? So quickly you forgot about October 7th, the worst massacre committed against Jews since the Holocaust?" And he repeated his determination to send forces into Rafah, the city on the border with Egypt, overrun by civilian refugees who fled their shattered homes elsewhere in the Gaza Strip. He said, "No international pressure will stop us from achieving all the goals of the war, eliminating Hamas, freeing all of our hostages, and ensuring that Gaza will no longer pose a threat to Israel. In order to do that, we will operate in Rafah too." Earlier on Sunday, Netanyahu also hit back at a speech made last week by the U.S. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. The Democrat and long-standing supporter of Israel stunned observers when he directly criticized Netanyahu.
The fourth major obstacle to peace is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
And called for new elections in Israel. Speaking on CNN, Netanyahu said Schumer's comments were, quote, totally inappropriate. Israel's allies have piled pressure on Netanyahu not to attack Rafah, where more than 1 million displaced people from other parts of the devastated enclave have sought shelter.
Take the ground offensive in Rafah. The military logic is one consideration, but there is a humanitarian logic as well. How should more than 1.5 million people be protected? Where should they go?
Schultz said he pressed Netanyahu about the need to provide comprehensive humanitarian aid to the people in Gaza.
Former President Trump's lawyers say that it's impossible for him to pay bond in one of his cases. His team is appealing the civil fraud judgment in New York, Attorney General Letitia James's case. But to do so, they have to post collateral worth over $550 million. Trump's legal team says they have reached out to 30 underwriters to back the bond, but potential insurers will only accept cash as collateral, not properties. Judge Arthur Engoron ruled in February that Trump inflated his wealth on financial statements used to secure loans. Trump is asking the court to delay enforcing the judgment until the appeal finishes. The deadline to pay is March 25th. The Supreme Court is hearing arguments in a high-profile case about free speech and government censorship on social media. The justices will decide whether the Biden administration illegally pressured social media companies to censor content. Here's part of the government side opening arguments.
The government may not use coercive threats to suppress speech, but it is entitled to speak for itself by informing, persuading, or criticizing private speakers. Like Bantam Books, this case should be about that fundamental distinction between persuasion and coercion. But unlike Bantam and the case that you'll hear next, this is not a typical suit where a speaker challenges government actions affecting its own speech. Instead, 2 states and 5 individuals are trying to use the Article III courts to audit all of the executive branch's communications with and about social media platforms.
And we turn now to our legal correspondent, Arlene Richards, to sort out the arguments and what the justices are asking.
The government here is saying that it's not clear from the lower court's decision what they can communicate to social media platforms and what they can't. They say government agencies do have access to important information that would help platforms make moderation decisions, and that even if the government wasn't involved, the platforms have policies that permit them to monitor what users are posting. Now, the states argued that the government essentially made threats to coerce the platforms to make decisions that conformed to what officials wanted. For example, saying that they were considering changing a law that protects platforms from lawsuits, and as a result of that, the platforms took action. The conservative justices expressed concern about this coercion. Here's one of the justices questioning the government attorney about that.
Mr. Fletcher, on that point, you mentioned coercion repeatedly in terms of threats. Can there also be coercion, in your view, in terms of inducements? And hypothetically, and I'm not saying this happened here, but would a threat or an inducement with respect to antitrust actions qualify as coercion?
The government attorney acknowledged that an inducement could be a form of coercion, but that it had to be tied to some government action and not just speech. Other justices questioned the state's attorney about whether there were forms of persuasion that could be acceptable. For example, for national security reasons. I think ultimately the justices are going to have to come up with a ruling that will clearly distinguish what is acceptable speech and what is not.
And the Supreme Court has declined a case from a January 6th defendant. It's from a former New Mexico County commissioner who was barred from office under the 14th Amendment. That's the amendment that some tried to use against Trump to keep him off the ballot. The Supreme Court recently determined that states can't remove Trump or other federal candidates from ballots. However, the justices said different rules apply to state and local candidates. Couy Griffin maintains he unknowingly entered restricted Capitol grounds on January 6th and attempted to guide the crowd in prayer using a bullhorn, not to incite violence. This ruling in Griffin's case may reinforce actions against state and local officials implicated in the January 6th incident. And New York City will no longer be providing long-term housing to adult illegal immigrants. Mayor Eric Adams said the ruling is effective immediately and meant to last through the duration of the immigration crisis. The city made the announcement after reaching a settlement with homeless advocacy groups. The deal does not impact families. Adults under 23 years old will be offered an additional 30 days for a total of 60 days of shelter before being asked to move out. Waiting rooms where new arrivals have been sleeping will no longer be available. Adams says his city is now relieved of certain legal obligations and should be able to better manage the influx of new arrivals. And the SEC is going full speed ahead with climate disclosure rules to forcing firms to report climate risk. They have to disclose actual and potential impacts, as well as their efforts to mitigate the risk and describe the process in detail. Republican lawmakers spoke with tomato farmer Renee Jones, who said the rules will harm her business.
The SEC has finalized a climate rule leaving immeasurable burdens on stakeholders throughout the country. Ms. Jones, you are already required to comply with Department of Labor, USDA, EPA, so on, by way of regulations. You know, in short, more regulations, is it fair to say, result in increased costs?
Yes, it is.
And for your industry specifically and broadly across ag, most of your pricing is fixed in large part by California. Is that fair?
That is fair.
So your costs go up in a market where your prices are fixed. Is this going to hurt your profitability?
Absolutely.
Under these circumstances, by these rules and burdens placed upon you by your own government, do you foresee a scenario where small farms like yourself and others across the country are forced out of business?
I absolutely do. I think that as time goes on, it's going to be, even though, like you said, we are resilient people and we fought through a lot of regulations already, but something like this is really going to cause you to stop and take pause.
Other witnesses said there's no standard way to measure climate risks, that the SEC may not even have the power to create these rules, and that the rules have unintended consequences. For example, fewer companies may go public to avoid the burden. The SEC says it considered over 24,000 comment letters before making the rules. It will start enforcing the rules 60 days after they're published in the Federal Register. It hasn't yet said when they will be published. Accusations today from the South Korean head of defense. He says North Korea is supplying Russia with thousands of containers loaded with military equipment. That's for the war against Ukraine. According to South Korea's defense minister, North Korea has sent 7,000 containers of munitions and other military weapons to Russia during the past year. He made the announcement during a press conference in Seoul today, happening just hours after the South Korean and Japanese militaries reported the North fired multiple short-range ballistic missiles. In return, it's believed that North Korea is receiving food, fuel, and military and economic aid from Russia, using the rail systems linking the two communist nations. And when we come back, while EU leaders are struggling with a trade deal aimed at aiding Ukraine, they face pushback from the European Parliament due to concerns over its negative impact on farmers. NTD's David Vivas speaks with a member of Parliament advocating for prioritizing support for farmers. Doctors and oncologists express concern over the rise of early onset cancer. The founder of a cutting-edge cancer detection company says new screening can catch the disease earlier. That and more after the break.
The 9th International Chinese Vocal Competition is scheduled to take place in New York City in September 2024. We are proud to announce that this year's panel of judges will include distinguished vocalists from the globally acclaimed Shen Yun Performing Arts. The prestigious Gold Award includes a $10,000 prize. For additional details, please visit vocal.ntdtv.com.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
They're just young people, hungry, homeless, and vulnerable. Abused youth often feel safer on the street. Now, more than ever, that's the most dangerous place of all. Covenant House is helping young adults facing homelessness. We're providing safe shelter to thousands, but the need is overwhelming, and no young person is ever turned away. Please call or go online now with your gift of $19 a month to help a young person. You'll provide safe shelter, hot meals, and medical care. Your gift will show them they're loved. Homeless young people are afraid and alone with nowhere else to turn.
You want to know that there's somewhere you can go that's safe. So the Covenant House did that for us.
Please call now with your gift of $19 a month. We'll send you this blanket as a reminder of the comfort your gift provides a young person tonight. Please don't wait. Your gift is the lifeline a young person needs now. Call the number on your screen or go online to safeplacetosleep.org. Thank you for saving precious lives.
There's always a searching process for beauty. You know it when you see it.
European Union leaders are meeting today looking to resolve a trade deal designed to support Ukraine. The EU Parliament weighed down on the deal with new restrictions last week that farmers say are unfair. NTD's France correspondent David Vives speaks with a member of Parliament who says they want the EU to focus on helping farmers instead of making trade deals.
This week, EU leaders convened for a summit where the fate of the EU-Ukraine trade deal hangs in the balance. Some remain hopeful for a resolution that upholds solidarity with Ukraine. However, uncertainties linger as the EU Parliament imposing restrictions last week amidst rural discontent across Europe. Farmers argue that such trade liberalization measures are a disadvantage to them, as they struggle to compete with lower-priced Ukrainian produce, leading to a decline in their income and market share. European Parliament member Rob Ross says he and his party oppose the trade deal.
And now they are making the lives of people very complicated because it's more expensive and more regulations. The farmers in Ukraine can produce in a different way than our own farmers. There's no level playing field anymore. Our own farmers have restrictions with fertilizers, with pesticides, etc. And this regulation is not in Ukraine. So it's double.
While maintaining trade deals, several member states are reducing the number of farmers, like the Netherlands, France and Germany. Ross says upcoming European elections might bring an overturn of the current policies if Conservatives were to gain a solid majority at the European Parliament.
They destroyed the last 5 years because of supporting the Green Deal in all the votes. They are destroying a lot of things like our energy system, our food supply, and also with the nature restoration law 2 weeks ago, it will make life very difficult for our people in Europe. And we have to reverse that immediately when we have a new mandate.
The European Commission promised last week to take steps to reduce the burden relating to controls for EU farmers. David Vives, NTD News, Strasbourg.
Nvidia's annual GPU Technology Conference is about to begin, featuring workshops and a keynote address by CEO Jensen Huang. Analysts anticipate updates on new products. Here's NTD's Don Ma with today's business brief.
So, Steph, whether we like it or not, AI is going to be the next big thing. So it matters very much when the poster child of artificial intelligence, Nvidia, is set to kick off its annual GPU Technology Conference. The next 2 days promise to be packed with news and announcements, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. Analysts expect the chipmaker to share updates about its new products, its partnerships with industry leaders, and its artificial intelligence initiatives during the conference. And the founder and CEO of the company is also expected to give a keynote address today. He's likely going to outline what's ahead for the company in the year ahead. Now, in prior years, Nvidia has also used the show to debut some of its biggest products. The chipmaker is expected to provide more details about its B100 chip, and that could be its most capable GPU yet. It's going to be the company's next flagship AI product, and investors could be getting new details about the chip, including pricing, performance, and demand. As well, industry leaders, including OpenAI, Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, among others, is going to take part in the conference, which could shed more light on Nvidia's artificial intelligence initiatives and partnerships. Now, to say Nvidia is on a hot streak would be a very much understatement. Shares of the AI darling are up a staggering 267% over the last 12 months and 79% year to date. Tech companies across the world see its graphics cards like rare jewels, so all eyes are on this conference. And speaking of AI, Reddit says the Federal Trade Commission is looking into the company's plans to license it to artificial intelligence companies. Now, the social media company made the disclosure last week in a securities filing, and it comes ahead of Reddit's long-anticipated initial public offering almost 20 years later after its launch. It's going to be the first social media platform to go public in years. Reddit said it does not believe that it has violated any U.S. consumer protection law, and the company has a deal worth reported $60 million per year to share its platform data with Google in order to train the tech giant's AI models. That's all from me, and back to you, Steph.
Great, thanks, Don. Next, on Monday, the Environmental Protection Agency announced a ban on the last form of cancer-linked asbestos used in the U.S. The new rule outlaws chrysotile asbestos, the only type of asbestos currently used or imported to the United States. It's used in car parts like aftermarket automotive brakes and linings and other vehicle friction products. While America's use of asbestos has been declining for decades, asbestos exposure has been linked to more than 40,000 cancer-related deaths nationwide. And the rise of early onset cancer has doctors sounding the alarm. The disease affects people between 18 and 49. The NTD's Andrew Thomas speaks with the founder of an early detection company about how his only sibling inspired him to improve screening and ultimately find a cure.
Sumit, thank you for being with us.
Sure, no problem.
First, can you tell us a little bit about your sister and what motivated you to start Cancer Check Labs?
About 14 years ago in 2010, my only sibling, my younger sister, unfortunately got diagnosed with cancer. About a year and a half later, she passed away. From that point of time, it really became my obsession to figure out how to cure cancer. And I've dedicated the last more than decade of my life to figuring that out. The primary tumor itself generally does not kill you. What kills you is the tumor sheds tumor cells that circulate through your bloodstream, known as circulating tumor cells, or CTCs, the acronym for short. And the CTCs spread the cancer in your body in a process known as metastasis. And the metastatic effects make your other organs biologically dysfunctional, and you die. That's really how you die from cancer. You die from the spread driven by these CTCs. What we've really developed here is a test that is able to identify, extract, and isolate CTCs from blood. And while that's been done in the past, over the past dozen years to study them, all the technologies today that can essentially isolate CTCs from whole blood deal with anywhere from 0.5 milliliter of blood to 9 milliliters of blood, which is basically 2 teaspoons on the high end. That is just not enough for any type of commercial or clinical application. You need a more statistically significant sample. Our test is able to handle much larger volumes of blood. We will do the same thing by isolating the CTCs, but this time we will run a downstream analysis on it, looking at some of the markers to identify the tissue of origin. Where is it coming from? Is this coming from your breast? Is this coming from your lung? Is it coming from your brain, your colon, so on and so forth? So that's what the test is. It is a pan-cancer solid tumor screen.
What's the most rewarding part of your work?
The impact. The reason I got into this, quite honestly, is my sister asked me to cure cancer. And that's before she died. And I think she knew that I had the drive, the will, and the capacity to try to figure out something that could do it. And we're not there yet. Early detection is the first step, because early detection is the key to curing cancer in someone that has it. Then there's obviously treatment. What do you do after that? What are the therapeutic modalities? All things we're working on, and we have a plan. but the first step is early detection. In human history, if you look at all human history wars that have occurred, all recorded deaths, the total cumulative fatalities, the estimates vary somewhat widely, but the most common estimates are 350 to 400 million people. You're talking about an impact on humanity that exceeds, in 1 century, saving more lives potentially than all lives that have been lost in wars in human history. And that absolutely makes me very excited, and also because I see myself being able to keep my promise to my sister.
And next up, a volcano in Iceland erupted over the weekend for the 4th time since December. Authorities said it still poses a danger to infrastructure, even as the lava flows began to slow on Sunday. Lava flowed from a 2-mile fissure on the peninsula near Reykjavik Saturday evening, a repeat of an eruption in February. Authorities had predicted the eruption due to underground magma accumulation. Lava flows prompted Grindavik residents to evacuate their town, which they also had to do in January when several homes burned. Anyone who had returned now had to leave again. Despite the eruption, Iceland's airport remains operational. Thank you for watching NTD Newsroom. I'm Stephanie Cox. We'll have more stories from the U.S. and around the world. Join Tiffany Meyer for the NTD Evening News at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 Pacific.